Good evening and welcome to Chicago Tonight Black Voices. I'm Brandis Friedman. Thanks for sharing part of your weekend with us. On the show tonight, Chicago's crime statistics reveal a mixed bag of trends. We'll get a data-focused look with the University of Chicago Crime Lab. Chicago has been her beat for nearly 30 years. Now, Maudlyne Ihejirika is bowing out. What's next for the award-winning journalist? Are you behind on your holiday shopping? We'll peruse what's on offer at the Chicago Fair Trade for any last-minute gifts.
I'm Angelito, and coming up tonight, we're trying food for the soul at a new restaurant in Lawndale.
All that's coming up, but our first story tonight, as 2022 comes to an end, the University of Chicago Crime Lab is here to break down this year's crime stats right after this.
Chicago Tonight, Black Voices, is made possible in part by Fifth Third Bank and by the support of these donors.
At Fifth Third, we believe when diverse voices are heard and empowered, communities are made stronger, lives are made better, and the future holds greater promise for all. That's why we're proud to support Chicago Tonight Black Voices. Together, we can make a difference. Together, we can drive change.
With municipal elections just weeks away, Chicago's leaders are looking back at another distressingly violent year. For 2022, the Chicago Police Department reports 661 murders occurred as of December 10th. That's down 15% since last year. Overall shootings are also reported as down about 20% from 2021 numbers, from about 3,400 to around 2,700. But reported incidents of motor vehicle theft have nearly doubled from 2021, and theft numbers also showed a steep increase. The University of Chicago Crime Lab uses a data-focused approach to studying crime and crime reduction programs. And they say while some of 2022's trends offer reason to hope for continued improvement, there's more to learn and, of course, more work to do. Joining us now to take a look at the data is Kim Smith, Director of Programs at the Crime and Education Labs at the University of Chicago. Kim, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
So first of all, we know that you parse data that you receive from the Chicago Police Department as they cooperate and participate in your research. Here is the Crime Lab's breakdown of shootings and homicides over the last 6 years. And we're going to see that on screen right now. We've got homicide victims on the left, shooting victims on the right. Talk to us, if you would, about the statistics that we're seeing here.
Yes, so as you said, shootings are down about 20% relative to last year, and homicides have gone down by about 15%. And those are certainly numbers, going in the right direction. Unfortunately, we're still not where we were before the pandemic, before the really historic increase that we experienced in 2020. So while things are going in the right direction, we still have a far way to go.
Does this data indicate that something the city or the police are doing is working?
It's really hard to say, and I think that's a question that researchers are going to be trying to answer for many years to come. We know there's a lot happening. There are changes to the criminal justice system and potentially changes to policing strategies. We know that community violence intervention organizations, or CVI organizations as they're better known, have received funding from public sector sectors that they typically were not able to kind of access previously. And we also know that the social service sector has been rebounding, and that has really important implications for crime and violence, given the really devastating economic and mental health impacts of the pandemic. So a lot has happened in the past year, the past 2 years, and it's really hard to say which of those different things, which of those different forces is continuing to kind of result in the crime numbers that we're seeing.
And certainly it sounds like a lot of agencies and organizations outside of the city and the police department themselves can have an impact on these numbers. But what do we know about what drives shootings and homicides?
So one of the things that I think is that's not quite appreciated as much as it should be is that a lot of shootings and homicides in Chicago are actually the result of an altercation. So an argument that escalates and turns violent, unfortunately, because a gun is at hand. And that has really important implications for solutions. Programs that kind of leverage cognitive behavioral principles or provide individuals with the tools to navigate those situations differently, therefore can be really impactful if the large majority of incidents stem from altercations or arguments. And I think that's something that we can use as part of the larger ecosystem of solutions around continuing to create safe and peaceful communities in Chicago.
Are violent crimes against people typically gang-related? Are there some misperceptions about that?
I think that is a misperception. When people think of crime in Chicago, I think they often default to shows like The Wire, where there are instrumental incidents that take place to further the goals of a gang, or disputes over drug turf. And while those certainly do take place, our read of the narrative data and also conversations with individuals who have potentially been exposed or involved with violence suggest that these altercations are really at the root of the gun violence challenge. And that does, as I said, I think that really does provide a really good opportunity for different programs like programs currently underway in Chicago to be impactful in keeping individuals safe.
So we also have sort of a decade-by-decade historical look at the last 130 years of homicide rates in Chicago, Los Angeles, and New York. What larger patterns do you see in this data? And we're looking at the line graph on screen right now, and we can see Chicago, it's higher than LA and New York.
I think there are a few things to take away from that graph. So the first is that for the majority of history, Chicago, New York, and LA actually looked very similar when it came to homicide rates. The 2 points of divergence were during the Prohibition period and then right now. And the reason that's important is because we can look to cities like New York and LA. Of course, they're different from Chicago, but we can look to those cities and understand what strategies, what policies did they implement, and how might we be able to leverage those. Because as you can see from the graph, while we've made progress in the past year, our homicide rate is still 5 times that of New York and 3 times that of LA. So we have a lot that we need to do as a city to make sure that we are, a world-class city, a city that is really on par with the 2 largest cities in the country.
What do we know about what those 2 cities are doing differently to make that difference?
So they invested a lot in community violence intervention programs. And I actually think that's an area where Chicago is starting to lead the country in terms of our ability to innovate and really conduct incredibly rigorous research about which community violence intervention programs work and for whom. So while LA kind of led the effort there historically, I think Chicago is quickly emerging as a leader in that space. Both cities also invested heavily in policing and specifically reforming their police departments to be much more constitutionally focused and community oriented. And then the third thing is both cities were really quite data driven, not just from the policing sense, but generally from a social program and even education investment point of view. So the secret sauce is still something that, again, criminologists and economists are trying to isolate, but we think that there's a lot that those 2 cities did that we can kind of leverage and actually already are in Chicago.
So you also have some data from the crime lab that shows the so-called safety gap. First, explain what the safety gap concept is.
So the safety gap is the difference in the homicide rate between different groups of people in Chicago. So you can look at it by neighborhood and try to understand the safety gap by neighborhood. You can also look at the safety gap by race, and that's what we're showing here. So we're looking at the difference in the homicide rate of Black Chicagoans relative to the homicide rate of white Chicagoans and Latinx Chicagoans. And what you're seeing is while over the past year, the safety gap has narrowed, it's still incredibly wide and much wider than it has been historically. And that, again, I think is really important as we're thinking about solutions. We know that Black Chicagoans and Black men in particular already bear such a disproportionate burden of the harms of our primary policy lever to addressing gun violence, which is policing and the criminal justice system. So as we're crafting solutions, we need to be incredibly mindful and thoughtful that the solutions do not, overburden a population that is both experiencing significant harms from the criminal justice system and high rates of gun violence.
And Kim, before we let you go, what else do you need to study? What do you need further study on?
So I think there's a lot that needs to be done to understand how to scale effective programs. Over the past 12 years at the University of Chicago Crime Lab, we've generated evidence about a number of programs that do really seem to keep young people safe. Things like teen summer jobs and a program called Choose to Change, which combines really intensive advocacy with cognitive behavioral therapy. So we have a growing body of evidence of programs that do really seem to improve safety. But what we still, I think, need to do a lot of research on is how to scale those programs and introduce them to different contexts, to different populations. Can we introduce different organizations to deliver those programs and maintain fidelity? So there's a lot around the science of scaling that we are trying to kind of wade into, and that I know a lot of others are thinking about as well.
Plenty of work cut out for you. Kim Smith, the University of Chicago Crime Lab, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Up next, we talk with Maudlyne Ihejirika about her retirement and what's next in a previously recorded conversation. Stay with us. A longtime Chicago journalist just stepped away from her job after 30 years covering crime, politics, education, and urban affairs. Her regular Chicago Chronicles columns in the Sun-Times focused on positive stories from the Black and brown communities. Along the way, Maudlyne Ihejirika has written books and mentored young journalists, this one included. Maudlyne Ihejirika joins us now. Congratulations and thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much.
Welcome back. We've done some redecorating since the last time you were here. Why now? Why was this the time you wanted to make this transition?
You know, December 3rd made, or would have made 29 years. And I retired a week before my 29th anniversary. And I think that for so many of us, the pandemic had us all reflecting. You know, is this what we want to do for the rest of our lives? Are we happy? Are there other things we want to do? And so I had been thinking about some of those things before the last year when I took some time off, and it was just, you know, I think it's time to just make that jump and do some other things while I still can.
Your Chicago Chronicles column, what kind of stories did you try and highlight, try and tell with that column?
Sure. You know, the moniker was long-form columns about people and places that make Chicago tick, with the focus on Black and brown communities. And for me, it was all about race, you know, all the many aspects of race, racism, discrimination, equity, inequity, you know, and then social justice, just all of those issues that plague our country, from poverty to crime to policing to politics, and, you know, representation for Black and brown communities, and those positive stories that just don't get told, those diverse narratives, the everyday heroes in neighborhoods all across the city, like WTTW tries to highlight now, you know, and just making sure that those stories are told.
You took a few years off to work for DCFS, a little bit in politics. You're credited with helping Representative Bobby Rush get reelected in 2000 during a very crowded race. He is also retiring this year, so you'll probably see him out there. But why did you, at the time, why did you move into communications and public relations, and why did you come back to journalism?
Sure. You know, I had been covering urban affairs and then kind of segued into covering DCFS for a while. And this was during the time in or late 90s when DCFS was always in the news. So many tragic stories of children being killed. And at one point I got an outreach from DCFS, and they said, you know, hey, how'd you like to come to our side? It was kind of like, you know, we'd rather have you on this side than covering, you know. And at first I said no, but I think everyone has a point where they're like, well, maybe I could try something different. And so I decided to go try it. And of course, children have always been my passion. And the majority of the children that were in the system are Black and brown children. And so issues plaguing my community, the the lack of adoption of those children in the system had always been an issue I was passionate about. So I went over there to see if I could make a difference, and did that for 2 years. And I will just say that politics makes strange bedfellows, and it's not easy. And so, you know, when I decided to, when Governor Edgar did not run again, I left and hung my own shingles and decided to continue doing public relations. And that's when I stayed in politics and worked with, did media and media strategy for members of the U.S. Congress, Chicago City Council, the Illinois legislature. And it was during that time that I was the press secretary for Bobby Rush's campaign, when a little-known politician by the name of Barack Obama was vying for his seat. Yeah. And it would be the only race that Mr. Obama would lose on his upward trajectory to the White House. So it was bittersweet, and to see him, you know, go on and win those higher offices. And Bobby called me upon my retirement last week and said, "Hey, I see we're both retiring. We'll have to get together and have coffee
and talk about
reminisce."
Retiring.
Yes.
Now that you've got time, or
yes.
so they say.
Yes.
What would you say, you know, because you've covered obviously everything, and, you know, you've said that there are a number of stories that have impacted you. The story of Sandra Bland, Jesse Jackson, when he got his vaccine from one of the black doctors who helped to develop it, yes. Wilton Gregory, the home of Emmett Till. Yes. You know, what are some of the highlights that come to you that you think about right now, and why are those the highlights?
I think in my early career it was covering public housing and the transformation of public housing as the nation began to demolish them across the country. It began here in Chicago because of the violence and crime and gangs that plagued Chicago. And there were so many stories there. One of the ones that really moved me was the story of Dantrell Davis, the young boy who was shot on his way to school holding his mother's hand. You know, and this was gang shooting and other gang members. And so for me, those were the essence of those stories that were the essence of why public housing didn't work, when you stack poor people on top of each other. And one of the stories I really enjoyed during that period was an exclusive interview with President Bill Clinton by merging in with residents of the public housing during a visit by the president. And because I am a black and brown person, I was able to be there, and no one questioned me. And when he came out, I was able to get a few questions in before Secret Service recognized that I was a...
This is a journalist, not a resident.
Exactly.
Almost out of time, Maudlyne. You know, you've written that your first book took about 17 years. The next book cannot take that long. What's next for you in about 20 seconds?
Sure. What's next is all manner of things. You know, I want to do some diversity, equity, and inclusion consulting. I want to do some work in protecting and promoting journalism, and I definitely will be entering academia at some point. You know, and most importantly, I will be starting that second book that cannot take 17 years.
Can't wait to read it. We're not done hearing from Maudlyne Ihejirika yet. Thank you so much, and congratulations.
Thank you for having me.
Back with more Chicago Tonight Black Voices right after this. This time of year, when to-do lists are long and time is short, actually leaving the house for holiday shopping might seem like a daunting task. But Chicago Fair Trade's vendors are hoping the prospect of buying artisan gifts that support local nonprofits is enough to lure you out of your jammies and into their holiday pop-up shop. Producer Erica Gunderson stopped in to check out the goods that do good.
You go home, get you a nice Bright Endeavors candle and light it, you'll be good to go.
Candles made by the social enterprise Bright Endeavors are among the goods that do good on offer at the Chicago Fair Trade pop-up holiday market through December 24th.
We've got 7,500 square feet of fair trade products: coffees, teas, chocolates, cookies, salts, clothing, jewelry, scarves, hats, mittens, gloves, home goods. Most trade is very unfair. 99% of trade is, the bottom line is just to make as much money as you possibly can. With fair trade, it turns that upside down. Everyone along the supply chain is treated fairly and with respect.
Many of the Chicago Fair Trade vendors, like Bright Endeavors, operate on a social enterprise model, employing young people to make home goods while learning crucial employment skills.
The moms that we serve are between the ages of 18 and 24, and for most of those young moms, this is their first job, and so they really get to come into a safe place to really expand their workplace skills, really learn about their executive skills, and they are paid to do that work, and so that really advances our moms towards economic mobility and career growth.
For me, they supported me a lot. And that support system and that I call it my little motherhood, sisterhood, that's what you need to get going, because you never know what no one's going through. But when you walk through the Bright Endeavor doors, it's like a ball of sunshine.
Similarly, HHP Lift offers young men social emotional support and skill development while creating home and self-care products.
They get a chance to learn the process of actually making something from scratch with their own efforts, providing them an opportunity to see that they are cared for, that they are thought of, that there are opportunities. And we talk about fair trade. I think a lot of times the same things come into play, where we think about people being held back, opportunities being really and truly not available. And so a lot of the gentlemen, if it wasn't for the workforce programs like HHP, they wouldn't have these opportunities. The products that they have are sustainable. They're well made, but more important than that is what they stand for. Again, giving individuals who don't necessarily have an opportunity an opportunity. And so it may be just a simple bag to some, but it means so much more to others.
For Chicago Tonight Black Voices, this is Erica Gunderson.
The Chicago Fair Trade pop-up shop is at 1457 North Halsted in the New City neighborhood this year. It's open through December 24th. Just enough time. You'll find more on that on our website. Customers are declaring a new restaurant as the place to go for soul food, but with a twist. Arts correspondent Angel Ito takes us to Lawndale for a taste of what's bringing Chicagoans from all over the city to the Soul Food Lounge.
It was after being approached by the Lawndale Christian Development Network to enhance the neighborhood that entrepreneur and chef Quentin Love decided to open what he hopes to be a soul food staple on the city's west side.
When we as a culture want to do something fancy, we go outside of our communities to have that experience.
And so the Soul Food Lounge was born.
The Soul Food Lounge is a place where the trend begins to change, where we deeply invest in upscale right in our own backyard. We don't have any fine dining or more upscale things in our own community that can bring the property values up.
Located off of 16th and Hamlin, just next door to the MLK Legacy Apartments, the Soul Food Lounge offers a wide selection of soul food combinations customers say they haven't seen elsewhere.
It's quaint, it's swanky, you know, the food is delicious.
It was a wonderful birthday dinner. The food was superb, delicious.
What did you get?
I got the pot roast with the asparagus. I got the Mississippi crab cake, and then this is the Creole. But we all tried each other's food. The lobster macaroni was...
But the menu selection isn't the only opportunity customers are finding within this new eatery.
I know we deserve it because so many times in our neighborhood we have small corner stores and there's a food desert in our community. So in order for us to eat, we have to go and put resources in someone else's community in the downtown area. I think it's good in the hood. I'm from the hood and I'm good.
You know, as a little girl, I grew up with my mom. She always took us out dining. It's an experience. I enjoyed that experience, and our kids nowadays don't have that opportunity to do that with everything that's going on in the world. It teaches etiquette, especially young people. Teaches them etiquette, teaches them that, you know, you can come right in your own community and have a really nice, intimate dinner.
And while the restaurant is only a few months into building its impact, Love says it can only continue with support from those both inside and outside of the community.
How do you change the paradigm of violence? You change the paradigm of violence by just bringing the beautification of the community, right? So when you're going down the corridors of the inner cities all over the nation, but Chicago, you see nothing but dilapidated buildings on the thoroughfares. It's like a criminal's haven. But what if the development of the thoroughfares are present and there are businesses all through there, then the element changes. So you don't have to go to the Vision, you don't have to go to Sheffield, you don't have to go up north to have these experiences. The experiences are right in your own backyard.
It's important for people to know that they don't have to take their dollars outside of the community to get a high quality meal. And so many times we've had to. So we will support it and we will ensure that this business builds a legacy and is a lasting business in the Lawndale community.
A real pound cake.
Wow, that's so good. For Chicago Tonight Black Voices, I'm Angel Ito.
Looks delicious. The Soul Food Lounge is open Wednesday through Sunday evenings with extended hours on the weekends. You can visit our website for more information. And that is our show for this weekend. If you're watching us on Saturday night, know that you can also catch Black Voices and Latino Voices on Sundays beginning at 10 p.m. And of course, join me and Paris Schutz next week at 7 on Chicago Tonight. Now, for all of us here at Chicago Tonight Black Voices, I'm Brandis Friedman. Thanks for sharing part of your weekend with us. Stay healthy and safe, and have a good night.
Closed captioning is made possible by Robert A. Clifford and Clifford Law Offices, a personal injury law firm pleased to give back to the community through numerous charitable initiatives.